I'm happy to join this webinar.
Great. Thank you for that, Ahmet. Going on to our next person is Richard Allen. A lot of you may be familiar with, whose area is talent ID and recruitment. Richard, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
I think he's on mute.
Yeah, I think I'm there now. It wouldn't work. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Have you got me? Good. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me on. Looking forward to this evening. So I'm currently the Director of Football at Loughborough University, one of the top 5 academic universities in the UK, #1 for sports-related subjects around the world, and has sports at its very heart. So delighted to be involved there. Before that, I spent 3 years as head of talent ID at the FA, and I was responsible for supporting the national coaches with the identification and selection of players for the national teams, men's and women's, as well as developing a talent ID pathway as part of an education kind of piece. Before that, I was 2 years at Queen's Park Rangers as head of the academy, and then the 8 years before that, I was head of recruitment at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. In the 20 years before that, I was involved in grassroots football, and I ran a youth organisation in the London Borough of Hackney called the Crown and Manor Club, which is very famous in its area, like a multi-sport club. So as much as football is my kind of passion, I see myself as a kind of a sports person more generally.
Great, thank you for that, Richard. Next here we have Monèm, Jemni, whose area is research and development. Would you like to share a bit about yourself, please?
Of course, Amrish. Well, thank you ever so much for this wonderful opportunity to put us all together from different countries and different backgrounds. Absolutely fantastic, and I'm really looking forward for this debate for many weeks. It's a unique, and then, for myself, I just say I'm an exercise scientist with an area of expertise in health and the optimization of human performance. I have helped several Olympic winners, but also football clubs, football players in the UK and the Middle East. I acted as a program leader for the Bachelor of Sports Science with Professional Football Coaching in Greenwich University, London, but also acted as the chair of the Qatar Olympic Committee Sports Science Program with Qatar University and the Olympic Committee. Currently, and for many years, I'm the chair of the International Science of Football Association, which aims to bring science and scientists and highlight and shed some lights on the scientists working on the background, on the backstage, in order to make this football happening and, a wonderful sport that we all love and watch. And I'm currently consultant and tutor at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and also a visiting professor in several universities in Europe and in the United States.
Great, thank you. Privileged to have you on. Next person, lastly, we have Burak Gurkan, whose area is commercial and marketing. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, thank you, Amrish. This is Burak Gürkan. I live in Istanbul, Turkey, and I have been in the sports industry, I think, since 1994. I used to work for Galatasaray Sports Club and Turkish Football Federation, UAE Pro League in Abu Dhabi, and I have a significant UAE experience. A basketball team in Turkey, which is Darüşşafaka Tekfen. It is a Euro Cup holder basketball team. And Genius Sports, and recently Atrium Sports, together with my lecturing in several universities and some consultancies to some sporting organizations and some startups.
Right, thank you. Hope you can all agree we've got a lot of experience here on one roundtable. I think it's very rare to have different areas such as talent identification and recruitment, performance and coaching, commercial marketing, research development, and medical and injury prevention, all on one roundtable. So that's everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So now let's get right into it. So to direct this, we're going to try our best to delve into all the different components on and off the field, and then bring it all together at the end of a roundtable. Now, I'm sure you can understand there's probably a lot of complexity in terms of like how things connect, So we're going to do our best to look at each individual one and try our best to try and bring it all together at the end. So, Mike, with over 23 years of experience, you've had a lot of exposure to the evolving practices in football. So with the experiences of being assistant manager and coach of a number of teams and different countries, can you give us some scope as to how you've seen the use of data evolve from when you first started?
Yes, I started 25 years ago, and at that time, my job didn't even exist. So there wasn't a fitness coach, or there was a coach and a doctor and a masseur and an assistant coach. And when I started, everybody wanted to ask me, yeah, but who do you belong to? The doctor? Do you belong to the coach? What do you do? And from this fitness coach side, now you see people become performance coaches, director of performance. In my time, there were non-fitness coaches, then there started to be one, and now in some clubs you see 8 or 9. And also in my time, I've seen all these evolution of no data at all, then slowly becoming the periodization, then the GPS started to come, and then it was only the data of what you have done in practice. So it was almost every time after the damage was done, you could see, oh, we've done too much or we've done too little. And now you see it being more and more evolved in we get to know the workload. We try to prepare the athletes for the training sessions. And now today it's all about identifying the players and readiness for the training and getting them ready for the game. So in the early days, it was, yeah, we do a training, and if we have success in the game, it's okay. If we don't have success, we alter the training. And now you see it slowly shifting more towards the athlete. You know, we look at the athlete, we prepare the athlete for the training, and then the training will prepare us for the game. So that is what I've seen evolve over these 23 years. And then, of course, I worked in the Premier League, where we had about 20 people running around doing fitness stuff. I didn't have to do a lot of things. I just delegated. But I was also in clubs where I was the only one trying to prepare 30 players. So it depends a bit on which team, which level you are. And even in the beginning of when I was at Ajax, I thought, now I'm getting into the Valhalla of football, and there was no data at all. So and then we had the least injury rates over the last 20 years, and everybody asked me, yeah, what did you do? What did you do? What did you monitor? And what did you do in the gym? And I said, nothing. And then they said, yeah, but what? I said, no, nothing. Because we didn't have anything to measure it. So then my experience was, you could better leave it. And so we left all the weight training and everything, and we had no injuries at all. And now you see on Instagram, and you see on Twitter, and you see all these new moves and new techniques, and a lot of things are going to be reinvented, because you see an exercise, but somebody else does the same exercise with the jump, and then a throw, and it looks more like dance choreographies nowadays. So now it's difficult to separate the good from the bad, and it also depends a lot on which level you are a performance coach, I think.
So based on what you mentioned, I think it would be important for Ahmet to give some light on spending a minute to expand on that. So Ahmet, how have you found it being effective based on what Mike mentioned for the monitoring of players, especially in the medical department?
Actually, it's monitoring is very important to establish the establish the scientific data in the club. So it's important to standardization and the standardization to examine and whatever you are doing. So actually it's important to statistics and feedback. So, but when I started the first, and in 30 years ago, with the work with the Olympic teams, so I started to get a data manually, and then I established a chart to make it. Then I tried to find the digital one, so the software. So and when I started a team, first I checked the monitoring, how to monitor the players with digital data or software. So it helps a lot to control the players and then getting more information about them.
So how do you find using technology and data effective in a way to monitor your players?
So first, I define the risk profile. Then they compare the previous and later, and then for the other players, also to establish the risk factors in the club. So it helps. Digital data helps a lot. I mean, for this, regarding to if you compare the manual data. So for this reason, I mean, we need actually now is like artificial intelligence to find a new data comparison with the others to find the risk factors and the injury risks, so on.
Great. So based on all that, so it's clear that obviously data has got an impact on the monitoring of players and also the team. So we have a brief understanding that obviously things have evolved over the years. There's more data being used, for example. Now, going back to Mike, so I just want to ask you just very briefly, what have you found most effective in terms of data being used now compared to how it was before?
Well, I had the privilege that in the Premier League, every week there was a company who wanted to do a presentation, and I think all the people now here on the Roundtable with 20 and more years of experience, we know in 5 minutes if somebody has a new idea. We know in 5 minutes this is going to work, or this is too much hassle for too much information. And I started to work 7 years ago with DNA, because I thought we have to go back. We can monitor people. We can put on risk profiles and everything. But if I know his DNA, that's the start for me from the beginning. So I started to work with DNA now 7 years ago. And from that moment on, I knew, because in my team of 25, you got a Usain Bolt, you got a Haile Gebrselassie, and you got a lot of in-betweeners. But we all train, and now we monitor them, so we already pick out the risk people. But I found out that there are certain genes that actually provoke these risks or not. For example, inflammation. Somebody have a gene who actually provoked this inflammation, and some of the players didn't have that. So if we had a training 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 with a lot of agility and a lot of movement, we had to take extra care of these guys with these genes. So that was for me a great help. We had guys who had power genes, 90% power genes, and we had guys who had only 10% power genes. But if we go in the gym, we start with 10 or 12 repetitions and everything. We had a couple of guys who only had to do power. You have a gene that actually tells you if you're VO2 max, if you are a high responder in training or a low responder. If you know all these things, for me that was a huge plus, because now I knew, okay, with this guy I go left, with this guy I go right, with this guy I go straight ahead. And that helped me a lot. Also with nutrition. We had people in Fulham who had 11% fat. We couldn't get them down with nutritionists, with salmon, with extra training, on a bike and everything. Their DNA showed us they had to eat carbohydrates and only do power training. And we got them down in 7 weeks. Certain players, like the very fast players, and they're very fast. But Usain Bolt cannot do 90 minutes of football. So we had players who had 90% power genes, and we had players who had 90% endurance genes. But you cannot treat them the same. So we started to difference training and sessions and everything, and we did studies, and it was huge result. We did RX players. We did a couple of Liverpool players. We did African players. So for me, that is the beginning, and that is the thing that helped me the most. New data from DNA.
Sure. So we've obviously in sport we're using a lot of things like GPS, athletic monitoring, and now it's kind of getting more and more specific based on DNA, for example, more about the athlete as individuals, and then connecting it as a whole. So that was very insightful based on that. Monèm, so your experiences with Arsenal, Charlton, West Ham, for example, do you have anything that you'd like to touch on based on what Mike and Ahmet mentioned there?
First of all, well, thanks for highlighting this monitoring and research. Basically, there are lots of things to mention about this actually, and in terms of research and monitoring. But to put the frame of my kind of little intervention here, we need to make sure what's the difference between research and monitoring. There's a huge difference. Research is basically an academic activity that is strict in somehow when it comes to fundamental research, for example. That's something that we are really leaving at the moment with fundamental research about the COVID-19 virus, with the strict protocols, strict trials, with human trials or pre-clinic and clinical trials, up to inventing some let's say immunization and things like that. However, we talk about applied research as well when it comes to football, when it comes to sports and exercise science. That is pretty much more flexible than fundamental research. And here, the question could be raised from the players, from the club, from the pitch, and from any kind of, let's say, dilemma that could help resolving few issues, either in the practice or before practice or after the practice when it comes to recovery as well. Monitoring is something else. Monitoring, as Ahmet said, is extremely important. Assessing, surveying, testing and retesting, checking and rechecking, adapt, adjust, readjust the training. We talk about here like the objective to achieve, and without any assessment, without any monitoring, coaches, physical fitness coaches could work without any objective to achieve. But if they step into this program by trying to assess, first of all, go for training, do whatever they can, coach, and then reassess again to to adjust the training, and then they could achieve those objectives as soon as they can, whilst preventing lots of different issues like what Mike said, preventing injuries. Why? Because he was doing something really concretely robust, scientifically based, and that's how we achieve those objectives without or with minimum of risks. Now we're talking here not only about medical stuff, but we talk here about assessing the mental health of the players. We assess the biomechanics aspect of the players. We assess the diet of the players, even the shoes that they play with. Now there are lots of technologies behind that. The pitch, the grass, the light, whatever you can talk about, the speed, monitoring the players while playing, but monitoring the players on the pitch. And you mentioned the GPS, for example, that could be used for some kind of intelligence, artificial intelligence, not only within the practice, but within the games. There are lots of people working behind the scene and behind the screens in order to, what we call scouting, find out the technical, tactical, intelligence tactique in order to play against that club or this club. These clubs have, this club, for example, has those players, those defenders who are kind of quick, fast, powerful. What is the best tactique to play against those players or those teams? Well, the GPS or many other techniques like video analysis has helped lots and lots into this kind of stream. Now, unfortunately, there's still a huge discrepancies between North and South countries. We cannot deny it. Although technologies, monitoring process has really made a huge advance. Scientists and technologists and technicians are working in developing lots of techniques and technologies. However, the applications is not at the full regime yet. And the discrepancy that I'm talking about here is, between what the northern countries do is completely different what the southern countries do. When we talk about Africa, for example, there's no technology at all. The Eastern countries, maybe they don't have any technologies either. Some kind of countries are really kind of catching up, like India, which was quite extremely kind of bizarre, and kind of I was gobsmacked when I found out that in 6 years' time, they're really applying huge technology and advanced technologies within a few years old federation or governing bodies or competition. Some countries have huge technologies like the Middle East. Some don't have. And some have the technologies, but they cannot apply it, or maybe the management is completely wrong. So if we talk about technique and technologies, we're not talking about only technologies that we could apply on the pitch, but could we talk about technologies to help management? And that's what you, Amrish, doing. Your role is to help clubs, federations, governing bodies to better manage their system, their strategies, and then they reflect it when the management is good, and then all the benefits will be going straight away to the end users, or the players themselves. Scientists now working on developing apps, technologies, artificial intelligence in order to put together the management structure, the management system within a club, taking into consideration the budget, the players, the managers, the fans, the connections with the societies, the connection with the industry, with the sponsors, the connections with the community, and also the connections with the governing bodies and the federation. With all those technologies, if they are applied correctly, then things will be much, much smoother. And that's what monitoring is about. It's about monitoring all the processes, all the little structure within this huge structure. It's not about applying or monitoring the players only. We're here talking about a holistic approach to monitoring, that is also backed up by scientists, because without those scientists who could adopt technologies, there's no improvement at all. Ahmed could mention that. Mike mentioned the DNA testing and the diet testing and the monitoring, but I'm sure that Burak and Richard could talk much, much more as well from their own perspective and our side of the point of view. When it comes to talent identification, huge progress has been made, huge progress. There was no talent identification at all, and Richard would certainly talk about that. I have done some research on talent identification in gymnastics in the United States Olympic Training Center as well. But we talk more about it, and then there is unfortunately lack of what we call knowledge from not only the manager side, but also coaches sometimes, They don't know what's the monitoring process, what could we help, or how could we help. And that's why what we do in the International Science and Football Association is basically to shed some light on those scientists who are inventing things, and they are making things much smoother, much easier in order to apply things that could help the players, the managers, the manager, the coaches, and the federations as well. So it's all about aptitude, knowledge, and application of these practices. And then we put together lots of different conferences, workshops, congresses as well, to make sure that the scientists are at the same level as the coaches, because sometimes there's a huge difference between the coaches and the scientists. Everybody looks at each other with a different way. So within this framework, we put together Congress when we bring, we brought like Diego Simeone, we brought like Carlos Gomez, Sabri Lamouche, and many, many other coaches all together. And they were absolutely gobsmacked to see how much they interacted with the scientists, because they didn't sit together. And one of the things that we need to promote is sitting together, scientists, physios, medics, with the coaches, with the field practitioners, in order to improve technologies and improve the approach to structuring all this business.
Thank you for that. I think that was very insightful. I mean, I think you've got a very good point there. I mean, one of the challenges that I found working in the Middle East and the UK is that every football department, for example, they all have coaches from South America, they have coaches from Europe, they have coaches from North Africa, for example, and you realise that not everybody has the same tenacity to be able to use the data in the same way as you would use in the Premier League, for example. So that kind of connection with what you mentioned about the coaches and the sports science aspect is extremely important, I think. Again, going back to what Mike and Ahmet said as well, if you've got everything on the field, we need to be able to put that into application. And we can only do that through connecting things as an ecosystem in that sense, based on what you were just mentioning. So before we get to Richard, Barak, so your area is commercial and marketing, right? Now, very briefly, I just want you to touch on, so we've got GPS, we've got athlete monitoring, we've got DNA, for example, we've got things with the applied research for in the clubs. Do you see this impacting the commercial strategies of clubs going forward? Like, do you see more of a connection between on the field and off the field? If so, like, could you maybe expand on that, give us your opinion?
Yes, I'm not a medical guy. I think I'm the only one in this group. And but we can link medical stuff or player data to commercial stuff. It is possible to commercialize it, and people on the street and fans of players, fans of teams are curious about their performances, training performances, and running distances, heartbeats, and this kind of stuff. It is too important for a normal fan, and it is much more important for a hardcore fan. And posting this kind of stuff on social media, or using this kind of data and statistics for commercial purposes is too important in today's world. Let me give you an example. For example, wearable technologies. And we all know that it is too important for team sports, especially they use it for trainings and lately in the matches. And it is very good tool to commercialize it. And you can choose a player, and you can have a partner, and you can conduct a campaign, and based on his running distances, for example. And for example, the most running player is Amrish, and the most flying airline is Turkish Airlines. You can design this kind of campaigns with brands together with player data, and you can post it on your social media accounts. You can organize polls. You can ask your fans, and they can have a guest weekly basis, and it would be a massive campaign for fans and for the brands. It is a very good tool to commercialize it.
I agree there. I think one of the things we're seeing more now is clubs are more down the lines of Disneyfication. They're looking to use players as commodities, for example, like the Mickey Mouses, and trying to sell merchandise, different countries. For example, to buy the Premier League is one of the most successful because it has so many people from different countries playing. So I guess like with everything that's happening with data on the field, and because footballers are the real brand in the clubs, that data is probably more and more going to be used for the commercial strategy going forward. Would you agree with that, Barak?
Definitely. Lately, commercial strategies are different than ever. And probably after this outbreak, it will be much more digital than before, because lately, as you know, people consume sport on digital platforms, and it will be massive after this outbreak from my point of view. And on the other hand, sponsors, potential sponsors, current sponsors, brands would like to use these kind of platforms in order to reach their target audiences. It is not, sponsorships is not like having a logo on backdrop or a board in the field and this kind of stuff. It is not the case anymore. And the brands and sponsors and future and potential sponsors are always looking for some digital opportunities to reach their target audiences, because it is interactive, you know. It is not a one-way sponsorship model. It is two-way sponsorship model, and it works.
Thank you. So, Richard, your area is in talent identification and recruitment, with experience with the England national team and also Tottenham Hotspur. So, going forward, I think one of the main things we're seeing more is you've got scouting, etc., etc. You've got a lot of platforms coming out to analyse players. Now, talk us through your experiences and just talk us through like how you think data may specifically impact talent identification and recruitment frameworks, and looking at two sides in terms of professional and academy.
Yeah, I suppose if I look back in 2005, when I went into Tottenham, there was very limited amount of information, analysis, data available within Talent ID. If we wanted to get anything, I had a guy in Germany called Caglar who was like the Netflix of kind of football videos and teams that you could get hold of. So you'd have to go to him, and 2 weeks later something would go through. Now clearly things have changed dramatically in terms of the information that you're able to get. Again, at Tottenham, Damien Comolli was our sporting director. He was close with Billy Bean, and luckily I got to meet him at Tottenham and in Oakland. And I think one of the first players that we used so-called numbers on was Darren Bent, but I think Darren Bent's numbers were fantastic. I think the key for me is how you link a club's philosophy, its playing style, to the analytics that you need to know. So, as I say, Darren's numbers were great. It just didn't take into account the playing style, perhaps, and his playing style. Also didn't take into account the fact that he was going to have to play with Dimitar Berbatov and have a relationship. So I guess within Talent ID, we always have this, is it the data, is it the analytics, or is it the live observation? Is it the skill of the scout? Is it the insightfulness of the person that's watching, the person who's got that experience and library of knowledge, understanding what good looks like? So I think there are quite a lot of challenges, but the key one is just making sure that, you know, we are looking at, you know, the right information, and I think over time that gathering of information and the kind of the data warehouse kind of effect, where you need something, you've got so many different feeds, but you then need to get something that's tangible, realistic, to be able to be used to make decisions. When it comes into the decision-making process, is it at the beginning, is it the middle, is it the end, or, you know, even within the kind of initial Talent ID stage? I think that it makes sense to you know, to do it all the way through. Sorry, you're going to ask a question. You look like you were just about to ask me a question, Amrish.
No, that did answer the question. I mean, based on what you just mentioned there, we've clearly seen a lot of data from an athlete point of view, what Mike mentioned, Ahmet mentioned, what Monèm mentioned. Now, do you see this translating a lot more into the talent identification side over the years? Because back in the day, scouting, for example, used to be as simple as just going to games, watching players, and now then it started to become more about like how many minutes they get in, and it started evolving more into how many passes did they make. For example, you seeing the performance side and the medical side play more of an impact in talent identification with the use of data.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and again, that's why it links in with philosophy. So, if you're a high pressing team and you want to win the ball back high up the pitch, well, that's the kind of information that you need to know about the player's ability to be able to do that. So, whether that's the physical capability, the tactical capabilities, is that the type of player he has? Now, you've got to be careful because, you know, different coaches have different philosophies and expect them to do certain things. If you're going to play three at the back and have wing backs, you know, your wing backs are going to have certain physical attributes. So to understand and know what those are, obviously, is useful. So yeah, I mean, I think there are a whole range of different areas that you might want to use. So at the FA, one of the frustrations would be you'd end up having conversations with coaches, and the conversation would go something like, does he play lots? Does he play a lot? He doesn't seem to play a lot. Well, I don't know. Suddenly, if you knew how many minutes at what level, that was quite useful information. It kind of saved time because you cut out all the chat. And if there were other specific things you wanted to know, you know, why is he not playing? Is he injured? You know, why is he injured? Is he injury prone? Is he, you know, is that something that he's got a track record of? Now, that might not be a concern, but it might be, depending upon the philosophy and the way that the club is operating. So I think there are lots of different things. But the thing that interests me is how you then combine that with the other stuff, because the live observation stuff is really, really important. So how do you try and objectify that information and put it into the mix? And I think that's where it gets really interesting to see how you're able to do that. And there's been some interesting kind of work. So Gary Klein's work on seeing what others don't, for example, really examining, you know, what that gut feel is and how you put that into that kind of more scientific space so that you can get a more general understanding of a player and what you're looking for. So, I mean, there's been huge amounts of, you know, leaps and bounds in terms of the information that's out there. I think it's just how you pull it together and make sure it fits with your own club's needs or requirements, positionally, technical, tactical, but based on what your club needs, because what my club needs may be different from somebody else's club.
I think you made a very good point there. I think a lot of the things in sport, especially football, for example, you have all these interventions on the performance side, you have all the interventions on the medical side, you have all the interventions on the talent ID side, and then you have all the tools such as technology to be able to measure what it proposes to measure. But I think the main important thing is how do you bring context to that? I think that's one of the most important things. And how, based on what you also mentioned, Richard, is how do you bring it all together and how do you combine all the metrics, but it makes it seamless, for example, because I think also from my experiences, for example, you get a lot of GPS companies, great at what they do, amazing metrics. You've also got, like Mike mentioned, DNA companies now, for example, and then you've got athlete monitoring companies. Yeah. But I think it tends to be quite challenging to have an impact on the wider kind of picture, just because there's so many dynamics involved in each one of the players, for example. And then, like Monèm said earlier, and you know, you've got to also bring in the coaches. You've got to bring the bridge of gap. Your coaching are more practical, for example. So,
and I also think that, you know, when you're looking at the spectrum of players, so academy players to first team players, at the top end you have high performance, got to be able to do it tomorrow. At the younger end, we're looking at potential. So, you know, it's okay when you're measuring successful passes, but then you've got to factor in things around maturation. So are you testing them there? Do you know where they are physically? Because the intention might be fantastic. So, you know, we had a player at Tottenham that was going to be released because he kept giving the ball away. And actually, when you looked at it, he was a very, very late maturer. And he would see a pass it was the timing was right, everything was right, the decision right, but he couldn't kick the ball 30 yards. He could only kick it 15 yards. So he kept giving it away. And that was perceived by some people as being, he's not good enough and we should get rid of him. Whereas other people could say, well, actually the intention was there. So the problem with talent ID is really complex. You've got to factor all those kind of things into it. We know there's stuff around relative age effect. We know the maturation is really important. And then all the psychological qualities as well. Your brain is still developing up to 24, 25 years old, long going after when your physical changes have stopped. So lots of things which make it really complex. And that's why, yes, having all the various component bits of information to look at, but then, working out a way of making a final decision on whether you're going to sign that player or not. Top end, yeah, no problem. They need to perform today or tomorrow. And I think we can measure that. Much more complex, especially pre-puberty, the way physical testing gets done. But I'm not sure, realistically, whether that's going to have any bearing. It should certainly not be any part of a decision-making process on whether you sign a player or retain a player or release a player.
So very briefly, Mike, Ahmet, so Mike first, do you see, based on coaching, that there's more pressure now from a talent identification point of view because of the use of data?
Well, it's like Richard said, it depends on which club you're coaching. So if you're coaching Manchester City, you're looking for players who are high up the pitch. If you are at the bottom club, you are with your back against the wall for 90 minutes almost every game. If you are in a middle club, sometimes you have to attack against the lower teams, and sometimes you have to defend for 90 minutes. So it's very difficult, and I noticed that the coaches, they want to know data, but the first thing they always ask, how many goals does he make? How many assists does he has? Was he injured? How long was he injured? If he's not playing, why is he not playing? He's costing 10 million. Why is he costing 10 million? Why doesn't Barcelona take him then? Why do we have to take him? So a lot of coaches are not sure about and they depend on guys like Richard who see the extra, because a Messi everybody can spot, but a Dennis Bergkamp nobody spotted. And they wanted to kick him out of Ajax. And then all of a sudden in a tournament, it was the same with Jari Lidmanen. They wanted to send him away. They had a tournament, they had to take an extra guy, they took him, and he scored about 20 goals, and then he flew.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult, and also he's injured a lot. Yeah, and I found out now. Yeah, because maybe it's not about him. Maybe you trained him a lot, you trained him wrong. Maybe he's got genes not suitable for these kind of weight training or whatever. And that's why all this data is very important, like Ahmet said, the monitoring and everything. But the problem now is you get more data, and you get less time. Yeah. Because the games are now in every 3 days. Yeah. So I think more data coming in and less time to figure it out.
Yeah, sure. Just very briefly, Ahmet, so with talent identification, is this having more of an impact on the medical side of point of view for you, or do you think it's going to have a lot more of an impact on the medical point of view? Because obviously we've had like players in the past in the Premier League, for example, spend a lot of money on them, they get injured. So do you think there's more synergy, or there's going to be more synergy on the talent ID side with the medical side going forward?
So this is in the club as a medical team. This is the most important part is injury prevention, because it's directly related to performance, and players' performance and team performance. So if the player injured, then lose their performance. Also, is a very serious player in the club, so the team lose. Performance. So I always concentrate on the injury prevention, but to establish, I mean, to manage injury prevention, you need staff and technology and equipment. So they have to put them together, because if you staff not enough knowledge and experience, they cannot use the technology and the other things to get data that I'm gonna use it. So, and actually for me is data, two types of data is important for me, is space related data and time related data to understand the movement of the players and then injury prevention. For instance, biomechanics is the part of the injury prevention management. So because this part is a bit lack of the medical department. So because the biomechanical measurements and the mechanical problems solved just mechanically. So you have to do biomechanic measurements like kinetic and kinematic measurements. So for the kinetic and kinematic measurements, you need technology, because you cannot identify when you look at. So you need a technology to identify to find the risk factors, biomechanical risk factors. Also to minimize risk factors, we have to get data to compare for the future. So also the data, we need to communicate with the staff. I mean, not only the staff, medical staff, also for the talk about the players, we need data to talk the coaching staff.
So based on what you said about data, just very briefly, are you now seeing, or do you now believe that there will be a vehicle for more talent ID data to each medical department, for example, to help make the decision that helps talent identification, for example?
Yeah. So we need data to discuss. So we cannot say without data. So we to use the data, you have to have a scientific part. If you don't have a scientific part, we cannot find anything to talk. So the problem is that to share data and to talk about the data, you need a language, scientific language, so to make understandable and to communicate. So that's the problem. Otherwise, just the words on the air.
Yeah, it's all about accessibility and convenience for all the departments or the players, for example. It's about finding that right medium. So I'm aware of the time. We'll be on till 9:15 maximum. We'll be going to a Q&A in the next 5 minutes. But before we do that, is there any other comment on talent identification, Monèm?
Yes, well, just very briefly, and I cannot agree any further with Richard's comments on the talent identification, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Just wanted to emphasize the importance in research in all what you have been saying, which helps monitoring. Well, research, for the last 30 years has facilitated not only data collection, but also the diversity of the data, the quality, the accuracy. So we're talking here about portable machinery that assess everything as close as possible to the players right on the pitch, equipment that in the past few, maybe 20 years ago, we couldn't take them on the pitch because they are heavy, they are really sophisticated, and they take a huge amount of time and space to calibrate. Now everything could be assessed on the pitch, as close, basically on the players, like the GPS and much more. We're talking here about sophisticated machines that are accurate, that are really sophisticated. Now, Richard mentioned the talent identification earlier. I have, myself and, back in the years, I have assessed players who were about 20 years old, 19 years old, and nobody have noticed that they were not biologically 18 or 19 years old. They were much younger. And the talent identification, there's a difference between the biological age and the chronological age. Like I could be 30 or I could be 20, but my biological age is not 20, it could be less than that. And the only way to assess it is by applying some sophisticated tests, which are radiography. For the prepubertal adolescent, we use the radiography of the wrist, and we check the ossification of the wrist's bones. However, for those who are post puberty, we have to find something else, and we have tested them with a test that has existed since the 1924 called Risser test, which assessed the pelvic ossification. And we found out that these guys, they were top Olympic athletes, but they were about 6 to 8 months delayed in their development. Why? Because they used to be training for 30 hours to 36 hours a week. So there is an impact of the exercise and the performance and the dosage and the intensity and the volume of hours they put on the pitch on their development. And that's why monitoring is so sophisticated, because it could cost lots and lots, not only for the players in terms of injuries, but also for the teams, for the managers, for even the country, if he is or she is one of the national squads.
Sure. You have to really be at a point where you have that accessibility and convenience in terms of the use of data. Like, for example, now you're getting more optical systems which now measure GPS and also track, tactical analysis, for example. So it's all about that kind of fluid accessibility. So one last question over the next 2 minutes before we're going to go into a brief summary and then a Q&A. The last one is for Burak. So we're seeing a lot of things with Real Madrid, Arsenal, Barcelona, trying to tap into the applied research market with their innovation hubs. I know we touched on this earlier in the call, but I wanted to ask you, do you feel that people at a board level, in terms of marketing, commercial, management level, do you feel like they've currently got that understanding of how it all works in the pitch with the data and how it could be used and on a commercial side? Or do you think there needs to be more education there for them to then utilize that?
I think it is more mature in Europe than other parts of the world, and in the US, of course. Let me give you an example from my country. It is it is not that common in Turkey, this kind of stuff. But lately, for example, Galatasaray are trying to set up a kind of innovation hub in the city center, and for several reasons. First, in order to get some other revenue sources, of course. They will sell some education programs like Barcelona or Real Madrid. Second one, they need qualified people for their business, and they can have these people from this kind of innovation hubs. And third one, they can follow all kind of technologies, sports technologies, and improvements by using this kind of innovation hub. And lastly, they can be in interaction with other clubs like Barcelona, Real Madrid, and other big ones in Europe and in the world. And it is getting more popular day by day in the world of sports. And if it is a debate in Turkey, and if this innovation hub stuff is debate in Turkey, I'm pretty sure that it will be very popular all over the region. I think Qatar is a very important hub for this. They have Josur Institute, for example, in Qatar. It is quite important for this kind of purposes, and it is getting more and more popular day by day.
Sure. I think that's a great point. I mean, I think going back to the question we have in terms of like actual data based on the roundtable, to my experience, I feel like there needs to be data solutions that can help bridge a gap between on the field and off the field that can then help the commercial side. Would you agree with that?
Sure, of course. And the data means a lot. You know, it is not just player data, for example. It is a match data, and it is very important. As you know, I used to work for Genius Sports before, and they utilize data, and clubs and federations and leagues can use data for widgets, for posts, and again for some polls, some campaigns, and it is too important. And recently, and streaming and broadcasting are getting digitalized day by day, as you know, and people consume sports on digital platforms and OTT platforms, and using artificial intelligence technology, motion capture cameras, and linking this kind of technology with data statistics, putting statistics on the screen, and commercializing this on-screen graphics with sponsors, and increasing viewing quality, and this kind of stuff are too important today.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm seeing that a lot more as well. I mean, the challenges are obviously to kind of streamline the processes between everything as well. So before we go into the takeaway points, please, if you've got any questions for Q&A, please fire them in the box. If you want to target any particular panelists, please send it to them as well. We'll try our best to go through 2 or 3, but first of all, we're going to share our screen, and we're going to have each panelist of our team, each member of our team, go through 30 seconds just to summarize the infographic that's on the screen. So if you see over the last couple of weeks, we've been putting up some infographic. So this will be summarized now before we go into our takeaway points and then the Q&A. So just give me a second. I'll just share my screen, please. Now, the reason for the infographics is because it's all about a learning process. You want people to come to their own conclusions for their own learning, rather than saying things in black and white as well, which I feel is really important. So first one we have is Mike. So Mike, do you want to spend 30 seconds just explaining this? Give me a second. There we go.
Okay. Well, you put this infographic, and normally you look from the left to the right. So a lot of data coming in, then you look what data you actually need, and then at the end, the data you actually use. And then when I started 25 years ago, it was from the right to the left. We had only a few data, and then more data and more data come in, and more data come in, and you used less. And now you see that you can look from left to right again. A lot of data coming in, and now you have to filter it, and then actually what is useful in the end.
Sure. So it's very important to discard what you don't need as well, based on the context of things. Next one. Let me change the slide. So we have Ahmet. So Ahmet, would you like to spend 30 seconds to explain this for us, please?
Hello, you can hear me?
Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Mm.
We'll come back. We'll come back to that one in a second.
Okay, I cannot see that.
You cannot see it. Okay.
Yes.
It might be based on the mobile, so we'll come back to you.
Yes.
Figure it out. Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay.
So talent ID and recruitment, Richard, please.
Yeah, I don't think they're two kind of separate kind of desert islands. They're a combination of both. So I think the sort of Venn diagram shows quite clearly that there is that sweet spot of in there in the middle where you need to use both. I think the art does come from the experience and knowledge of somebody. Whose opinion is most important is interesting to factor in. Is it mine? Is it the person I'm working for? Is it the scout below me? Is that based on their experiences and their track record of success? But clearly, as the guys have been saying, you need data, you need analytics, you need something to bring in to discuss and use. How you use it, when you use it, how you talk about it, I think is important. Knowing your audience is incredibly important. And as I said before, really being clear about your club philosophy, your playing style, and the requirements that you need. I think then bringing those two areas together, I think in a really complex space, you're giving yourself a better chance.
Right, thank you. Next one, Monèm, research development. Do you want to summarize that in 30 seconds, please?
Yeah, well, basically, it's a perfect graph to summarize the relationship between the applied research and the players, the clubs, the governing bodies on the federations. And as you could see, it's a reciprocal, one feeding into each other. This relation is not only from one direction to the other, but could be both. It's a circle, basically, one feeding into each other, whereas the sport technology or the data could be the facilitator in between them. So the question or the research could be raised from the players, from the field, from the ground, from the clubs, from the management, or from the federation. The researchers or the scientists are here to help by providing either new technologies to apply or to upgrade these technologies, adjust them, readjust them in order to make sure the functioning and the relation will be really kind of feeding one into the other without with a minimum loss. Because as we said, risk could be taken at any stages of this relation, and risk could lead to loss, and loss could be very costly as well. So I'm really happy with the graph because it's a very symbolic, and it's you could talk lots about it actually rather than just 30 seconds.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. The main thing here is obviously sports technology is used as a vehicle that can connect that as an ecosystem with applied research, clubs and federation.
Yeah.
Ahmet, have you managed to sort your video out, or do you want me to explain it for you?
Yeah, please. I cannot see because of my network is not working properly now.
You could share your screen to him.
Sorry, I cannot really.
Amrish, you could share his screen.
Okay.
So he could.
Okay. Maybe try one more time. Can you see that, Ahmet? I think it's because it might be mobile. Because we're
mobile problem. I'm sorry about this.
No problem. Because we're short on time, I'll summarise this. So for effective injury prevention, medical departments need to collaborate with other departments. So in the middle, it resonates 90%, which could be the recovery rating of that player. 10% could be the risk factor. But in order to be effective, you need to have that collaboration between all the departments, from the management to the medical team, to the sports scientists and the coaches. So I think that's summarised quite well. And again, you're going to have to use data in a way to kind of streamline that process. So before we go into the Q&A very quickly, I'm just going to summarise our call. First of all, thank you to the panellists for your time and sharing everything. It's been extremely valuable. And thank you for all those who have given questions for the Q&A, which we'll go through in a second. So now we've looked at all the components. So if you remember the beginning of the roundtable, the question was, how will increasing use of sport technology and data analytics, impact, club ecosystem, and the innovation strategies. Now, looking at all the components as a whole, it gives us a strong indication for the following. Clubs, organizations, and also universities, for example, need to use sport technology as a tool for innovative strategies. Now, based on everything we're hearing, it can be as a way to limit friction between on the field and off the field, and also between departments. For example, you've got performance, who want to go fast all the time, then you've got medical that want players to slow down for recovery. So utilizing sport technology in the right way can act like a medium for collective data insight, which of course can in turn help streamline those innovative strategies. And those strategies may be from a department point of view, or maybe from a commercial point of view. I think also takes out a lot of conflict as well. Now, based on the conversation we've had, the ideal scenario would be to combine all these areas through their visible and invisible elements as part of an overall framework with an ecosystem that progresses over time. You can't do everything too quick. You see this all the time in clubs. Clubs always want to be fast all the time. So they always try and get the new technology, the latest expertise, and they want to be quick. But you have to be able to tailor things along the way and decide when to utilize elements of technology that becomes a modular system. So based on this, the ideal types of sport technology may be the ones that, one, help bridge the gap between academy and the professional game, so it becomes more seamless. Clubs can't afford to spend 50 million on players anymore. And two, the ease of access between scope on the field and off the field for understanding and obviously the overall commercial business operation, because clubs need income to survive. Now, it's all going to be based about the requirement of fluid and seamless movement of this data for decision making between everyone, because everyone needs that kind of sustainability without being overloaded. Now, this can also be related to being able to utilize the non-sensitive elements for commercial, like I said before, football becoming a modern day Bloomberg. But the main challenge, it seems to be, is providing the required expertise based on clubs' existing frameworks and to help this evolve. This is also because when you're providing more connectivity and expertise as support structures available, you are bridging the gap between the club, the sports technology company, as well as the academic institution for overall effectiveness. But when you've got all the different cultures, the philosophy, the education of all the staffs in the clubs, the question is, how do you make things easier? And I'm sure we all agree here that if it's profiled well enough, based on the circumstances in the club at that time, and combined with expertise, we can all be in a good level to add some value to an ecosystem. So, as a finishing point, so let's just quickly, we're at 9:15 now. We've got a number of questions. What do you guys say? Do you want to quickly pick one or two quick questions, or would you like us to directly contact you, send them through email to us?
I think we could take 2 minutes to answer one of the questions or two.
Okay. So
one of the questions. Shall I go ahead?
Okay, so we have one here. So it's quite an important one by Ahmet. So with all this data and analysis to consider, how much time is spent on planning and preparing training sessions, fitness sessions with the inclusion of all this data? I think that might be a quick one for you, Mike.
Well, that's a good question, because time is limited. The data has to be processed, and the coaches go home, and then the performance guys are collecting all the data, and then the next day you're trying to give this information to the coaches, and then the coaches have prepared another session, and so that's always a struggle, and that's why in England they do top ups, so they let the coach do whatever he wants. We know then exactly how many meters he ran, approximately how many of these meters are high intensity, and if we have to do topples or not. But it's a difficult thing because time is very few.
Of course. I think that's a very good question indeed, especially with you have a lot of data analysts in club just spending a lot of the time looking at data, as opposed to actually spending the time to communicate the data effectively with coaches. So I think that's a very good point, very good question. So moving on, one for Barak. So in your experience generally, do you feel club executives and boards have enough invested in resources or processes to effectively monitor all those processes together?
Can you repeat it? I lost the connection for a minute.
Yeah, sure. I'll repeat that. So in your experience, generally, do you feel that club executives and board members have enough invested in resources or processes to effectively monitor everything?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. And but according to my experience, it is very much related to the regions. For example, mature sports countries like, for example, UK, France, United States, or Germany, and this kind of countries. For this kind of countries, yes. For relatively smaller countries in terms of sports, and it is no. But at the end of the day, it is vital for sporting organizations, leagues, and clubs, you know.
Yeah, I agree there as well. I mean, the main thing there is, I think when you put data solutions, it can actually probably streamline things that clubs may also have more to invest, for example, because it's looking at return of investment, it's bringing all the processes, but that may be in the medium to short term, medium to long term, I guess. Okay. So what time is it? Okay, so we'll pick one last question, very briefly. So I know we've got a lot of talent ID people here. So for Richard, let's go with, what key data would you utilize for talent ID or scouting in environments where access to an integrated team of analysts is limited?
That's a good question. I suppose it goes back to basics. What I would try and do around live observations is try and get some objective data, and that's quite difficult, getting everybody on the same page. But I think you can start to gather information and use similar language, have a similar understanding. And when I was at the FA, we started asking questions, not just based on can he head it, can he kick it, but based on kind of the philosophy. So if your philosophy as a young player within the under-15s group was they need to be able to look forward and play forward, when the scouts went out to watch, that was kind of an area that they would consider. And then maybe look at it rather than say they can or they can't. It's, you know, frequency of when they do those activities. So is it never, sometimes, always? Then it depends on, you know, what position they're playing, how you weight that. But then you can suddenly start putting numbers on stuff, which I think then gives you a different picture. Now, what the numbers are, you know, as long as it remains consistent and people understand it, then you're starting to build up some data on a player. How many reports do you need to do on one player before you make a decision? Is it 4, 5, 6? Is it, you know, multiple eyes? So do you want different people, you know, seeing the player? And then you're starting to collect that information so that you're making a decision. So if I didn't have any analysts, if I didn't have any medical data, and I couldn't use that, then I would have to go back to basics, thinking about what am I looking for within the scouting report. And that would be combined between watching the game, watching training, watching them warm up. It might be gathering information about the player. What are they like in terms of characteristics and behaviours? So I try to start making that more objective than subjective.
Great, thank you for that. So we're going to wrap this up now. Just before we do, I meant to share this last screen for you. So as we mentioned, based on this summary that I just mentioned, so this is kind of an infographic where it says start with a small ecosystem, could be one or two elements, and evolve that ecosystem over time, because that's what's going to get that sustainability and progressiveness. The most important thing is you've got to test and trial things. So, firstly, a big thank you to our Roundtable team for sharing the insights. I'm sure all attendees are privileged to have listened to you all. We've got a lot of people in different time zones as well, so they'll be listening to the recording. So before we all log off, once you close the window, we will be grateful if you could please fill out our feedback form. This is extremely valuable for us to maintain a good level of content in relation to the sports ecosystem. Secondly, if you did find this valuable in any sense whatsoever, please share your post and hashtag BSP2020RT and tag us in the post so we can interact with you in there as well. And if you do like this content, then please leave us feedback with the form provided after you close the window. And last of all, you'll also receive an email which also includes links to connect us all to all of our social accounts. So if you want to stay updated with what Richard's doing, what Burak's doing, what I'm doing, Mike, Ahmet, Monèm, then feel free to connect to us. And that link will be in the email you'll receive soon. So don't forget to follow Volute Sport on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Stay updated with the content developments. Thank you once again to our Roundtable team. Pleasure having you all on. And also for all of you who have registered. We're sorry we couldn't answer all the questions, but going forward, we'll be having more kind of one-to-ones going on with 6 people in the field. So we do hope that this added some much needed context and value to you. And in the future, we look to continue with this kind of content. So stay safe, and we look forward to connecting to you all soon. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Stay safe, enjoy the lovely weather, and thank you to all our panelists. Any last words?
Thanks very much, guys. Hope you've enjoyed it. Speak again, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Also, I enjoyed very much. Thank you for all.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Amrish, for putting us all together. First of all, it's been great, and you mentioned it. I mean, the whole thing rised into how we manage the let's say the monitoring and the management all together in one holistic way. So I'm really grateful to put all this like one layer, first of all, but I hope there are going to be some more layers and more opportunities for us to interact with the people as well, with much more questions to answer.
Of course.
Thanks.
Well, we look forward. We all have lots of potential here, so I'm sure we'll add some much needed value to the industry, especially with everything going on. I think it'll be great. So I look forward to speaking to you all soon, and attendees, have a good week.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.